Our speaker tonight, that our good longtime friend Pat has, thanks to him, has been working on is George Hampshire. I'll get it close. Maybe one of these days. Now, as you can see, what he's going to be speaking on, and reading through this and what Pat has told me before, I'm sure, like all of our speakers here, it's going to be very interesting and most importantly, very important to South Dorchester Folk Museum, because that's what we're all about, is the history of South Dorchester. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to this young gentleman right here.
Thank you. My name's George Hampshire. From Pennsylvania, but I had a place on, can everybody hear me okay? I had a place on Taylor's Island for, I guess, 17 years on Robinson Neck Road. I bought a 100-year-old property. Well, it wasn't quite 100 then, but it's 125 now. Property on Robinson Neck Road. My family and I enjoyed that for a long time. We also had a sailboat over at the Slaughter Creek Marina, a 33-foot boat we would take out and about on the bay. So I got to know a lot of people down here over the years and really love this county and this area. I'm here tonight to talk about the Transpeninsular Line. Actually, two different subjects. Transpeninsular and Mason and Dixon, they're two separate subjects. So I'm going to start with the Transpeninsular, and then I'm going to talk about Mason and Dixon some too. I've been trying to gain interest in this Transpeninsular Line ever since I heard Pat. I started looking into it when Pat gave a speech at the Brick Church, I guess it was 10 years ago, for the centennial or bicentennial of the Battle of the Ice Mound. And I didn't know much about it, and then I started hearing things, and people always refer to the Transpeninsular Line as the Mason and Dixon Line. And so it piqued my interest, and I started going. I went to the library in Dorchester to get some information and got a little, and then I found there was a room at the Easton Library called the Maryland Room. And that room's kept closed unless you make a reservation and go there. And the librarian takes the material out for you, and then you look at it. So I got some more information then, and I didn't get too far with it. Nobody seemed to be too interested in it. And I kind of let it go, and then I lost my notes over 10 years and all that. And then I gained interest back in it again when the project for the restoration of James Island began. The end of the Transpeninsular Line is on James Island, was on James Island, and which is now underwater. And we have documentation that proves it was on James Island at the southern end of James Island, but not an exact point of where that was. The Transpeninsular Line started in 1751. The surveyors were sent, they thought they were at Cape Henlopen. They were sent to Fenwick. And at Fenwick, they started their, they call it Cape Henlopen in all the documents, but it's actually Fenwick. And they started their survey there and continued west across the peninsula all the way to Taylor's Island, at James Island. And some things you read refer to James Island as James Point. So it may or may not have been attached to Taylor's Island at that time, but they used the two words together, or two names together, Taylor's Island and James Island. And so the surveyors surveyed across the peninsula all the way to James Island, and they got to Slaughter Creek. They stopped there and then continued to James Point, which was another 3 miles. And that led to a lot of confusion because the Calverts were saying that the that James Island and Taylor's Island weren't mainland, and the surveyors in Penn felt it was mainland because you could walk across Slaughter Creek at that time, and they got out there. So the way the laws in England stated the property had to be, the peninsula had to be divided, was the corner of what is now Delaware. At that time, it was the lower 3 counties of Pennsylvania. The corner of that had to be halfway between the Chesapeake Bay and the ocean. So stopping at Slaughter Creek gave the Calvert that would move the middle point a little bit west, which gave the Calverts a little more property, and moving it east gave the Penns a little more, or moving it east would have given the Calverts more property, moving it west would have given the Penns more property. So the middle point wasn't determined at that point. The argument went to court in England, and after 9 years of argument, they decided that James Island was the terminus of the Transpeninsular Line. And in the documentation that the Penns and the Calverts signed and agreed on at the time, it mentions James Island and that the point was at the southern end of James Island. So that was established. The distance from the ocean to James Island is 70 miles. So the middle point, which is right off of 50 on 54, is at 35 miles. So when these surveyors came across, they put stone markers in every 5 miles coming across the peninsula. The last one they put in was at 30 miles because they didn't know where the last one was going to go for another 9 years. And then they went back and put those stones in, but they never put any markers west of there. The only thing they used were wooden posts. Everything was done by line of sight. So the surveyors had teams of axemen. There were large parties. There were 4 surveyors and probably another 20 men in that group. And they would cut the woods so they could see from one point to another. And they did a lot of their work at night. They used the stars to set up their instruments and make their calculations as far as where they were going. And then at night they would set posts every mile, and they would use a candle to find the post and be able to sight in. And it was a complicated thing. These men spent almost every night awake. So there's been talk of finding markers west of the middle point, and there is none. They were wooden posts, and they were never, after this. There's one stone marker?
It's buried in the ground though, out there in Dick Wright's field. They put it there in 1970, when they resurveyed it.
Oh, okay, yeah, the Transpeninsular Line was resurveyed in 1972.
Well, something like that, yeah.
It was resurveyed.
I talked to the guys that put the stone down there.
They did? Great. Well, they resurveyed it in 1972 because the original surveyors had the line all over the place. It was just really crooked. I can show you, let me see here. I have some copies of the 1972. Well, in here I have the, let's see what this one, get around where I can see. Get around where I can see those. Okay. You can see as they came across from the ocean, it was pretty straight, but then the markers started getting all over the place. This is where the original markers were.
Oh, wow.
Some of them were as many as 600 feet off, but in 72, they went through and straightened the line out. The governors met at the line, did a ceremonial handshake, agreeing on the new state boundary, and it was all just a matter of where properties were being taxed and who was actually in Delaware and who was actually in Maryland. So they worked, that was all worked out then. Now, if I go back, I can show you. Here we go. Okay. This is a map of where they surveyed. Now you can see, let's see here. This line going across, the solid line, is latitude. That's not what they surveyed. This one's latitude. They're straight lines. Now the surveyors then, this is the path they followed. And if you look at it, you can see it's a curved sort of line. So they know they surveyed this on some sort of radius, but no one has any idea what it was, what star they might have used, or how they did it, or why it's crooked like that. But ultimately, the people in Britain that were overseeing this agreed that this was correct, and the Calverts and the Penn's descendants also agreed it was correct. So as far as the boundary goes, that was what it was and what it still is. So if you go, let me see here. Now, this is where, it's hard to read this, but I have it on here. I did a bad scan of this. It says certain, whereas, down here it says, whereas the said east-west line extended west to the verge of the Bay of the Chesapeake, runs through Taylor's Island and through a small part of James Island at near the southern end of James Island. So we know that's where it ended up. Exactly where would be conjecture to make, we'd have to guess where exactly it would be. But if you, I'll show you some other maps I have. Okay, the yellow line is the Transpeninsular Line, is a straight line actually going from Fenwick to the middle point. And you can see this dotted line under here is actually the state line. So they did follow the original survey when it was resurveyed. Now this is going from the middle point out to, it was 35, the other line was 35 miles from the middle point to the ocean. So this one's 35 miles from here to the Chesapeake. And if you look, you can see the shadow of what was James Island on this map. And this is Taylor's Island right here. Now, I've got something a little better. And so this is an older aerial view showing James Island. And in this area, here's Mulberry Point, Oyster Cove. And so James Island at one time was connected here to Taylor's Island. But the end of the yellow line is approximately 35 miles from the end, or from the middle point.
Can you tell us what the middle point, where it is?
Yeah, the middle, I'll show you exactly where it is.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a.
I go
yeah.
by, sometimes I go up to
Yes.
Delaware.
Yeah, it's right off of 50 and 54. I'll show you exactly how to get to it. So this is, the lower yellow line here is a straight line from Fenwick, which does go through Taylor's Island, but it would miss where James Island was. And it doesn't follow the curve that the original drawings have. So this is the same thing. Here's Taylor's Island Campground. The straight line puts you down here. The line to James Island puts you up here where James Island once was. Again, the same thing. Okay, this is another map. And when the Calverts and Penns were granted this property in America, they really didn't know where the heck their borders were. And they were told, the Calverts felt that their border was up here in Pennsylvania, going across this hash part. That's where Maryland claimed their property. Pennsylvania felt the border was way down here, going across Maryland. So there was a lot of argument about taxes, property, livestock. The people were hostile towards each other, and there were murders and other things that went on. So this became a very contentious thing. So they couldn't decide where, they knew in their deeds that they, where this border was supposed to be, but they didn't know where it was on the planet. They didn't have, a surveyor had to find that. You had to locate your latitude with the stars at that time. So that's where Mason and Dixon were brought in. But that's 12 years after the original Transpeninsular Line was done. The two things aren't the same. It's hard to keep them from getting confused, but that's the same map again. This is on the Grace Foundation site, and this is an old map showing where the large X is Taylor's Island, the small X is James Island. And so you can see here, I think this would be Oyster Cove, this would be Mulberry Point. So they ended up down here somewhere. Not exactly, there's no way to tell exactly where. Again, another one of the same types of maps. Okay, now this is at Fenwick. This is, back here is Fenwick Lighthouse, and this is Crown Stone, they're called. They have the Penn crest on, this is the Calvert crest on one side, and Penn's crest on the other. So this is marker 0 on the Transpeninsular Line at Fenwick, at the lighthouse. I took these yesterday. I started in Fenwick and worked my way over here. I didn't want to use other people's photos, so.
That stone has been recarved some years ago.
It was?
Yeah,
I believe it.
yeah, it was recarved.
I believe that, because I'll show you one, I'll show you one that doesn't have any marks on it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not certain it's one of their stones, but I'll talk about that when I get to it. Now this is the brass thing that would be on top. This is on top of that stone. This is what I was telling you, Pat, might have been on top. That's why that hole was drilled on the top of the stone that you have. So if that stone was hit by a plow, or somebody clobbered it with their car, that brass marker could be somewhere in that area still, unless somebody chipped it out and took it for a souvenir. Then it's gone. This is the marker that's at the lighthouse, and these are the men that surveyed the original line in 1750. They started in December at Fenwick, and they built a shack, and they just got blown away. And so they had to delay things a little bit, and they got started on it again in 1751 and completed it. But they were four men, two from Pennsylvania and two from Maryland. John Watson and William Parsons from Pennsylvania, and John Emory and Thomas Jones. And I'm pretty sure places like Parsons Creek might have picked up the name from William Parsons as the surveyor. And so this goes into, this line established the east-west boundary between Pennsylvania's lower three lower counties, now Delaware, and the colony of Maryland. Established also the middle point of the peninsula, 35 miles to the west. And it goes into the coat of arms and whatever. Then the king, who was king at the time. Oh, just some scenes of the lighthouse. And there's the marker right in front of it. So it's a couple blocks back from the beach. And now the lighthouse is obscured by buildings, so it's not used for navigation, but they still use the light. This is the beach right there. And that's it, Fenwick Avenue, mile marker 0 at Delaware side. So this is the second stone I found. This one is 10 miles inland at Selbyville. If you go to Selbyville and then go south on 13, right at the Maryland border. This is Route 13, right here at the top of the picture. 113. Yeah, I'm sorry. I always mix them up.
That's about 50 feet off the highway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right there. And so this also has the brass marker on the top. And it's pretty easy to find. As soon as you see the sign for Maryland, you take the left there on that road back into a small industrial park. So this is that stone.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you missed the very best stone.
Which one?
The 5 mile marker.
I couldn't find it.
Well, I can't tell you the name of the road. It's off from Fenwick Island. It's not far off from the main road from Fenwick back.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a goat pasture across the road, which was across. It's behind the house now.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the woods, 50 feet, and it looks original.
It does.
It's got green on it, but it looks original.
So a little
There's
patina.
no erosion on it hardly at all.
Wow.
And there's a Mr. Hall that's across the road. I have to ask him, because he's got a daughter or something that's across the road. To go, I've been in there several times. But that's the best one, that's the only one that hadn't been recarved.
I couldn't
And I
find
don't
it.
mean to keep interrupting your
No, that's
speech.
fine, I'm looking for input on this, that's why I'm here. I tried to find it and I didn't, I had
I'll
vague.
tell you the name of the road if I had my notes with me.
Well, I've got, if you do